Our story begins with a true investigation of a particular type of orchid that was discovered in the dense forests of Amazon. Known as the ghost orchid, this flower has captivated artists and gardeners for its rare beauty and softness. But no one knew that behind this beauty, there is a terrible and scary story. Chapter 1, Discovering the Secret. Years ago, a scientist named Dr. Sarah Cooper traveled to the Amazon jungle to research rare plants. Because of his interest in botany and obtaining more information about rare orchids, spent a lot of time in these forests. Dr. Cooper has worked with various plants for years and knows that nature can be strangely dangerous. After a few days of exploring the forest, he came across the elf orchid. A rare and beautiful flower that was always hidden in the dark shadows of the forest. The beauty and charm of this flower made Dr. Cooper decide to take it home and do more research. Chapter 2, Escape from the Forest. Moving outwards, what Dr. Cooper envisions is hardly advisable. It was F. As soon as he entered the road, he felt something watching him. At this moment, he met a friend named Tommy, who warned him to be careful with this flower. "It's a strange flower," said Tommy. "I've heard that those who pick it meet with evil and dire consequences." But Dr. Cooper, who believed in his research and work, listened indifferently and decided to collect a sample of mud. Chapter 3, Warning signs. Returning home and examining the elf orchid samples gradually led to unwanted problems. Dr. Cooper nightmares. You know about orchids. He dreamed that the flowers were saying to him, "We are trapped, free us." He felt terrified and alone, as if the flowers were spirits from the forest asking for his help. These nightmares and feelings that happened to him made him continue his research. After several days of communication with other researchers, Dr. Cooper realized that many of them had similar experiences with this flower. Chapter 4, The Beginning of Problems. As time passed, Dr. Cooper noticed that strange events were happening around his house. Strange sounds, inexplicable shadows around, and he felt like he was never alone. He also noticed that his relatives were strangely met with misfortune and unwanted events. One day, one of his close friends, David, suddenly disappeared. He had come to Dr. Cooper's house to talk about the research, but suddenly no one saw him. Dr. Cooper horrified Debbie that the elf orchid was blooming when David was in her garden. Chapter 5, A Bitter Truth. After David's disappearance, Dr. Cooper decided he began to research more deeply about the genie orchid. He approached the locals and asked them about this flower. They told him that this flower could not be reconciled with spirits and ghosts. Anyone who steals or harms this flower is somehow trapped by it. Dr. Cooper discovers that the genie orchid is a cursed flower that traps lost souls and cannot forget their torment. This flower has suffered from some kind of hatred and revenge of the spirits, and all those who harm it will suffer from their lives. Win. Chapter 6, Trying to get rid of it. Now that Dr. Cooper knew all these facts, he was under a lot of pressure. He did not want his wife and other loved ones to be in danger. Because of this, he decided to say goodbye to the flower and put it back in the forest. He returned to the forest where the flower was discovered and worked hard to restore it to its original place. However, Joel's weak and damp voice challenged him, "Don't leave us, we need you." Chapter 7, Final Consequences. I can't leave you here, Dr. Cooper said guiltily. And so, he once again sat in the garden around the flower and embraced it. But that night he experienced tremendous hardship and felt a fog of fear in the corners of the garden. The people of the village, who are aware of the mysterious handwriting of the forest disasters, quickly approached Dr. Cooper and tried to stop him. But ignoring them, he was trying to release the spirit of the flowers and return them to the lap of nature. Finally, Dr. Cooper fell asleep among the trees and orchids and experienced a deep and bitter sleep under the frightening shadows. He knew he was joining the spirits that imprisoned these flowers. The end. From that day to after that, Dr. Cooper was never seen, and his story became a horror legend. Bostan Orchid Genie gradually faded into legends and no one could go there again. In the end, the elf orchid became a symbol of the amazing power and beauty of nature, and at the same time, a reminder of the dangers of killing the noblest of souls, and still, if you walk into that forest, you may hear the wails and wails of the elf orchids. It's as if the spirits are still searching for a way out, and anyone who turns to this beauty will be mysteriously trapped. This story portrays the depth of beauty and dangers hidden in nature and offers a reflection on the bond between humans and nature. Finally, Dr. Cooper fell asleep among the trees and orchids and experienced a deep and bitter sleep under the eerie shadows. He knew that now it is to join the spirits that have imprisoned these flowers. From that day to after that, Dr. Cooper was never seen and his story became a horror legend. Bostan Orchid Genie gradually faded into legends and no one could go there again. In the end, the elf orchid became a symbol of the amazing power and beauty of nature, and at the same time, a reminder of the dangers of killing the noblest of souls. And still, if you walk into that forest, you may hear the wails and wails of the elf orchids, as if the spirits are still following the path they seek release, and anyone who turns to this beauty will be mysteriously caught in their trap. True Orchid Horror Story, Orchid Rain. In the heart of a dark and unknown forest, there was a strange and rare species of orchid named Death Orchid. This flower was known for its extraordinary beauty, but those who approached it experienced a kind of mental and emotional torment that they would never forget. This true story tells of a trip to this forest and the secrets that were hidden in it. First chapter, Journey to the Forest 2021, a research group including 4 scientists led by Dr. Ali Rostami, a famous botanist, is trying to discover new plant species went to a remote forest in the north of the country. Dr. Rostami has always heard about the orchid of death and believed that if he could discover this flower, he would have a great achievement. The group members included Ms. Sarah, a biologist, Mr. Amir, a photographer, and Ms. Maryam, a botany student. They moved towards the forest with hope and enthusiasm. At the beginning of entering the forest, there was a calm and pleasant atmosphere. The sound of birds and the breeze of the trees had created a pleasant atmosphere. The second chapter, searched the group with its advanced equipment in search of Mare Orchid. They were exploring when suddenly Sarah shouted, "Look! I found out where we can find the orchid of death." Dr. Rostami ran towards him eagerly. Next to the roots of a large tree, an orchid with black and white petals like saw teeth was blooming. Everyone noticed the wonder of the beauty of that flower, but suddenly a cold wind blew and an unintelligible voice was heard from far away. "What's that sound?" Sarah said softly. But Dr. Rostami carelessly went to the flower and picked a sample of it. As soon as the flowers are picked, the atmosphere of the forest changed drastically. Suddenly, the shadows started to move around and as if an unintelligible sound sounded in the heart of the forest. Chapter 3, Scary Consequences. The next day, the group decided to continue their work, but everything had changed. Everyone had a strange feeling. Amir, the photographer, became very stressed and said, "I can't stay here. I feel like we are being watched." But Dr. Rostami insisted that they continue. At night, everyone decided to sit around the fire and analyze. In the middle of the night, Sarah suddenly woke up. Felt that someone or something standing next to him. When he looked away, 2 bright eyes were staring at him in the darkness. He was very scared and screamed. Everyone woke up, but there was nothing. The group tried not to worry and went back to sleep. Chapter 4, Nightmares. But the nights had turned into nightmares. Sarah kept dreaming of orchids saying to her, "Leave us alone." And Dr. Rostami also dreamed that the orchid kills him and traps his soul in its trap. Days passed and the silent atmosphere of the forest gradually became darker and darker. To the tent they left and decided to return home, but suddenly they forgot the way back and got lost. Although they had all the necessary equipment and tools to communicate, their phones did not work for no reason. Chapter 5, Meeting with Spirits. One night, Dr. Rostami and his colleagues noticed that trees near them were moving in a strange way. They decided to go to them. The trees were annoyingly making strange noises. In disbelief, the souls of the people who were lost in the forest, one by one appeared and approached them. The spirit said in a weak voice, why did you pick the flowers? We are all trapped by these flowers. Dr. Rostami and his team were horrified and realized that this flower had life and kept the souls of those who harmed it in a cage. They should have escaped from this forest earlier. Chapter 6, Infernal Forest. Although they were trying to get out of the forest, everything was going the other way. The trees were opening in such a way that there was no sign of exit. The members of the group gradually became panic and anxiety, and despair overcame them. One of the members decided to run away, but suddenly a ring of tree roots was quickly grabbed from his hand and he disappeared in the blink of an eye. We have to get out of here. We can't stay here, Sarah shouted. But when they looked behind them, they saw Dr. Rostami pulling towards the orchid of death. They saw he was saying unintelligible sentences and was slowly moving towards the flower. Sarah and Miriam called out to him with cries and moans, but he did not listen at all and was completely under the influence of the flower. Chapter 7, The Final Disaster. In an effort to save Dr. Rostami and themselves, Sarah and Miriam decided to break through the enclosing foggy walls and head towards the faint light shining in the distance. But when they reached that light, they realized that the light was actually Dr. Rostami's flashlight that was disappearing. While trying to reach and off they went, suddenly finding themselves in the middle of a circle of towering dark trees. The trees were fast approaching and the screams of the spirits had reached their peak. We will not be abandoned, you join us. Suddenly Sarah and Miriam heard evil laughter. Dr. Rostami approached them completely madly and said, "We can't run away anymore, we have to unite with them." The two girls looked at each other fiercely and realized at that moment that their fate was in the hands of the orchid flower. Chapter 8, The Sad Ending. Sarah and Mary quickly moved away and tried to get out of the root-filled area, but despair overtook them. The trees were connected by their roots and put pressure on them. Dr. Rostami's scream was always alive in their ears. Eventually, they reached a point where they could no longer go on and had no way to escape. Eventually, the research team was permanently lost in the forest. Years later, some tourists came to the forest and in search of its wonders, they came across the orchid of death. Terrible narratives of because of the wandering spirits and deadly beauty of that flower, it is still heard throughout the region. The end. Today, when one goes to the forest and sees the death orchid, one is reminded of the lost souls and their fate. The story of Dr. Rostami and his group is still alive in the heart of the forest, and secretly in the corners of the forest, the moans and cries of the spirits are heard. It is as if they are still trying to escape from the clutches of this cursed flower and tell their story to anyone who picks the flower. In the heart of the Amazon rainforest, where the least sunlight reached the ground and the shadows were deeply hidden in the darkness, there was an orchid called the evil orchid. Because of its rarity and magical beauty, this flower attracted researchers and flower lovers, but those who obtained it somehow fell into its trap. This true story tells of a desperate attempt to discover the secrets of this flower, which ends in ruin and death. Chapter 1, The Discovery of Flowers. 2018, a research group consisting of 4 scientists, led by Dr. Sarah Mashhadi, traveled to the Amazon forests. Dr. Mashhadi, a famous and well-known botanist, was looking for the devil orchid for years. He had heard that this flower, with its magical power, attracts and imprisons human souls. The members of the group included Mr. Nima, a photographer, Ms. Miriam, a biologist, and Mr. Ali, an ecology expert. They started their work with modern equipment hoping to discover this flower. Their search begins with high energy and enthusiasm, but they soon encountered threats lurking in the forest. Chapter 2, The first signs. Days passed and the group was still trying to find the evil orchid. The signs were slowly appearing. They noticed that the surrounding trees seemed to be moving and a strange sound could be heard in the corners of the forest. Sometimes, shadows moved between the red and black trees, but every time they went towards the sounds, they found only silence. One night, after dinner, everyone went back to their tents to rest. But Sarah did not sleep peacefully. He felt that someone or something was standing next to him. When he opened his eyes, he realized a shadow is standing in the corner of his tent. He got scared and screamed loudly. Everyone woke up, but something was missing. Worried and anxious, Sarah shared her dream with the others, but they fell for the joke. The third chapter, getting to know the forest. Despite these experiences, the group decided to continue. They went deep into the forest, and with each step, they felt their steps giving life to the forest itself. Meanwhile, Mr. Nima captured a stunning image of a deep green and purple flower, which had reached its peak of bloom. That might be the evil orchid. And he said excitedly. When they went to the flower, suddenly a scary sound echoed in the forest. "Run! Run!" And the trees rushed towards them like rods. The group sped away, but none of them knew that this was a sign of impending danger. Chapter 4, Fear and Terror. A few days later, Mr. Ali suddenly fell ill and his body temperature rose sharply. Sarah and Miriam tried to take care of him, but Nima was overwhelmed by the sad and slain existence. He kept feeling that something was bothering him. Monitoring one night, Sarah and Nima were sitting together in the tent, when suddenly they heard faint moans from a distance. "Help! Help!" Sarah said fearfully, "What's that sound?" "The sound doesn't seem to be coming from this forest," Nima said in horror. They decided to go near the source of the sound. When they got there, they encountered a terrible sight. Chapter 5, Facing Reality. Under a large tree, some orchids were blooming. But this time, they had strange expressions. The flowers were screaming and each of them shouted in a different way they did. Sarah looked at these apparitions in astonishment, but when she approached an orchid, she felt that a spirit was trapped within it. "What's going on here? Why are these flowers burning like this?" Sarah said fearfully. Suddenly, a spirit was released from the mud and spread across the sky. This sudden event caused Nima to retreat in fear, and Sarah was deeply affected. They realized that orchids somehow represent the wandering souls of humans, who are strongly connected to each other. Chapter 6, Discovery of the Truth. One night, Sarah decided to discover the truth. He referred to old books and texts about orchids and their properties. He realized that this flower has the ability to attract souls and imprison them, and this is some kind of curse that has been imposed on it. "We have to get out of here," he told his friends. "This flower is leading us to death." But Nima insisted, "We can't go back without the evil orchid. This is a rare opportunity." "It is a terrible danger," said Sarah angrily. "If any one of these take the flowers from the forest, they may face death." Chapter 7, Final Consequences. The next morning, the group decided to go to the evil orchid. They picked flowers and moved towards the camp. But suddenly the trees joined together and blocked the escape route. The spirits were screaming and a rumble was created in the forest. Mr. Ali was severely delirious and was constantly whispering. The spirits surrounded them and said to Sarah, "We will be free if you return the flower." Scared and terrified, Sarah made a quick decision. "We have an orchid, let's return him to escape from here." Chapter 8, Failure and the End. Committed to confessing to the spirits, the group returned to the tree where they had arranged the flowers. But suddenly Nima screamed, "No! I can't let go of these flowers. I need them," and hurriedly moved towards the flowers. Sarah and Miriam tried to bring her back, but Nima was drowned in the euphoria of the flowers. Suddenly, the ground shook and large, dark shadows rose from the ground. Nima was swallowed into the darkness and her scream disappeared in space. Sarah and Miriam, terrified and desperate, they ran towards the forest. The trees twisted wildly and the ghosts chased them. Mary said, "Why did he do this? We can be saved." Final chapter, Surrender to the shadows. As Sarah and Miriam try to escape, they notice that the forest has changed drastically. The trees were connected to each other and there was no way out. The lost souls screamed and approached them. "Join us. We'll all be together." Finally, Sarah and Miriam were caught in the trees and there was no way to escape. Did not find. They looked at each other and realized that they were now part of that forest and those orchids. Their story joined the legends and the forest continued to attract new souls. The end today, if one goes to the Amazon jungle and sees the evil orchid flower, one must know that this flower has a terrible beauty and a light that ensnares human lives. Those who approach this forest may encounter the sounds of moaning and screaming that echoes in the heart of the forest. The story of Sarah and his friends became eternal learners of nature and its amazing forces.